My name is Linda Carter, and for 30 years, I gave everything I had to a company I helped build from the ground up in Austin, Texas. Not just my time, my energy, my creativity, and more weekends than I can count. I was there in the trenches, pulling all-nighters, picking up the slack when others bailed. There wasn't a single department launch or project bid I didn't touch, and yet somehow, my name never once landed on a promotion list. What did show up beside my name, though, was blame. Anytime something slipped through the cracks, whether it was a late shipment, a budget overage, or a missed deadline, it always found its way to my desk, regardless of whether I had anything to do with it. Meanwhile, every key position above me, one by one, got filled by Rick Mason's relatives, cousins, in-laws, nephews, even a barely out-of-college niece who couldn't draft a basic floor plan. They treated the company like a family inheritance, not a professional enterprise. Rick used to be different. Back in the early days, when we ran operations out of a stuffy one-room office with an overworked copier and no heating, Rick and I were partners in all but name. He handled client relations and business development. I ran logistics and execution. We were a team. But the man I once trusted morphed into someone unrecognizable over the last few years, someone whose loyalty wasn't earned but inherited, and if you even dared to challenge that twisted little system of nepotism, they'd close ranks fast. It didn't matter how long you'd been there or what you'd contributed, step in front of their gravy train, and they'd run you over without blinking. Naturally, I became their first target. It started subtly. Sudden removals from meetings I used to lead, final decisions being made without looping me in, small mistakes magnified like scandals. But the moment that really made it clear I was being pushed out was when Rick called me into his office one Monday morning. I still remember how calm his face looked, how he folded his hands like he was about to offer me a favor, not deliver a knife to the back. "Linda, you're getting older. You just don't have the stamina anymore." That's what he said. Right to my face. No hesitation, no apology. Just like that, he reduced 30 years of grit and sacrifice to a number on my birth certificate. Then he had the audacity to suggest I retire early, said it like it was my idea, like he was doing me some kind of favor. I left his office numb, heart pounding in my ears, anger swelling beneath my skin. I wasn't just hurt, I was humiliated. And somewhere in the chaos of that moment, I realized something even worse than the betrayal itself. He meant every word. This wasn't just about age, it was about erasing me before I became a threat to the little kingdom he'd handed over to his secretary-turned-manager, Tiffany Rhodes, and her band of underqualified relatives. I went home that night and sat in silence for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past tears. I was calculating. And that's when my son, Ethan, who'd been watching me spiral in silence for weeks, finally spoke up. "Mom, come work with me." He said it like it was obvious, like it was always meant to happen. Ethan had been building his own engineering firm for the past 5 years, Carter Engineering Group. Small but growing, real work, real people, real respect. I had been so focused on surviving where I was, I hadn't even considered what it would mean to choose something new. And so, for the first time in decades, I walked away, not just from a company, but from a life I had poured myself into. I packed up my office, ignored the smirks from Rick's niece at the front desk, and left Mason and company with my head high. I didn't know what would come next. But I knew this. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. When I joined Carter Engineering Group, something in me came back to life. My son Ethan handed me a fresh desk, a full inbox, and a list of real deliverables. None of the corporate games, none of the favoritism. I was just valued. Every early morning meeting, every email thread, every late-night check-in. It was like rediscovering who I used to be before the politics poisoned everything. I didn't expect Rick Mason to notice. I figured he'd moved on, probably busy training his new recruits, Tiffany and her clique of cousins who still didn't know the difference between rebar and roofing tiles, but it didn't take long before our names crossed paths again. It started with a bid, a mid-sized transit project just outside of Dallas. I helped Ethan and his team pull the proposal together in record time, drawing on years of contacts and processes I had built back at Mason and Company. We secured it, fair and square. And just like that, Rick found out I wasn't just retired, I was winning. He didn't take it well. At first, it came in the form of petty rumors, whispers around town about how I was freeloading off my son's success, that I'd just gotten lucky with one project. Then it turned to interference. Someone on Rick's team filed a formal complaint questioning the licensing on our proposal. It didn't hold up, of course, but it slowed us down. That was the goal, but none of that compared to what happened the day I visited Mason and Company to retrieve some personal paperwork they hadn't sent over, an old 401k rollover file locked in HR's storage. I made an appointment. I arrived early. I was calm. I even wore navy slacks and a blouse, trying to look neutral. I didn't expect a warm welcome, but I didn't expect what followed either. Rick's office was at the end of the hall, and I passed by it on the way to HR. His door was open and he saw me immediately. Called out, "Linda." I hesitated, then I turned and walked in. He looked older than I remembered, his face puffier, shoulders tense. Maybe it was guilt, maybe just the grind of pretending he still ran the place. "What are you doing here?" he asked. HR said my old documents weren't sent, just came to pick them up. He leaned back, looking smug. "Still clinging to the past?" I shook my head. "Just tying up loose ends. I've moved on." Then, as I turned to leave, his tone shifted. "You know, it's kind of funny. You always thought you were irreplaceable, but the place is still standing." That stung, but I kept walking. Until he said, almost under his breath, "Ethan must be so proud, giving his mother a hobby." I stopped, turned, and for the first time in 3 decades, I let the fury show. "You have no idea how proud he is," I said coldly. "And just so we're clear, you didn't replace me. You diluted everything we built, and the cracks are showing." He stood up so fast his chair slammed against the wall. In one motion, he reached for a folder on his desk. Thick, overstuffed, careless. Maybe he meant to throw it on the table, maybe just to scare me, but he hurled it. And it hit me, right on the forehead. The corner split my skin like a razor. I staggered back, more in shock than pain. I raised my hand, touched the warm trickle. Blood. He didn't apologize, just stood there breathing hard, like he was waiting for me to scream. I didn't. I picked up the folder, set it gently on his desk. "You just made your biggest mistake yet." I walked out, head high, face bleeding. The receptionist gasped. HR scrambled to offer tissues. I waved them all off and drove myself to urgent care. 3 stitches, a mild concussion, and a new fire lit inside me. That night, Ethan walked into my kitchen and saw the bandage on my head. He froze. "What happened?" I told him. His jaw clenched. His fists tightened. "I'll kill him." "No, you won't," I said softly. "That's not how we win." He didn't understand at first, thought I was just trying to keep the peace. But I wasn't. I was planning something bigger. By the time I went to bed, I had already drafted a detailed report of everything that had gone wrong in that office long before I left. The nepotism, the mismanagement, the losses. I wasn't going to fight Rick with fists. I was going to bury him in facts. After the incident at Mason and Company, something in me hardened, but it didn't break. That weekend, I stayed home and barely spoke. Not out of fear, not from pain, but because I was calculating. 3 stitches and a swollen forehead weren't just battle wounds. They were a turning point. I realized then, I wasn't just out of Mason and Company. I was going to outclass it. Ethan sat across from me Sunday morning, coffee in hand, eyebrows furrowed. "Mom," he said gently, "you don't have to prove anything. Not to him, not to anyone." I looked up at him, steadied my voice. "That's where you're wrong. I have to prove it to myself." I dove headfirst into Carter Engineering Group, not just as a mother lending a hand, but as a strategic operations advisor. Ethan gave me full authority to rebuild what Rick had shattered, an actual team, and not just any team. I started with a list of names. Old colleagues, veteran engineers, project managers Rick had discarded like broken tools over the past 2 years. Most had been let go, forced out, or quit out of sheer frustration. Some were working odd jobs, others were barely hanging on. I called each one personally. "Linda, is this really you? You're with Ethan now? He's hiring? I thought you were done with construction." One by one, they agreed to meet. And at a modest cafe on South Lamar, over steaming mugs and greasy breakfast sandwiches, we began planning something new, something better. Ethan's company had the bones. We would give it muscle. By mid-month, 5 of my most trusted people had joined the team. Some brought in their own connections. Others brought knowledge that couldn't be Googled, like how to catch a faulty bid before it wrecked a whole project, or how to manage 5 crews without losing your mind. Together, we tackled our first big challenge, the Green Ridge Expansion Project, a multi-phase urban development initiative funded by the city of Austin. Carter Engineering was one of 6 firms invited to submit a proposal. Rick's company, of course, was one of the others. The bid packet was 147 pages long, a mess of zoning specs, environmental impact estimates, and a timeline that made grown engineers cry. But it was also an opportunity to step into the big leagues, to claim a seat at the table where the real deals were made. For 2 weeks straight, our office was a war zone of caffeine, printouts, and dry erase boards. I took over process design and cost forecasting, Ethan handled client presentation and innovation strategy, and our newly assembled team worked like a machine. What we submitted wasn't just a bid, it was a vision, and it worked. The city awarded Carter Engineering Phase A of the project, site preparation and foundation work. Phase B went to Rick. He was furious. I heard through the grapevine that he'd expected to land the whole thing. His secretary turned project manager, Tiffany Rhodes, had boasted just a month earlier that Green Ridge is ours, top to bottom. But now they'd have to coordinate with us, share timelines, budgets, materials. Rick didn't like sharing. The following Monday, I received a formal request for a joint meeting between our firms to align the project schedule. I walked into the city conference room wearing a navy blazer and my grandmother's silver pin, the one I wore the day I got promoted to senior manager 15 years ago. Rick was already seated, Tiffany beside him, her bright lipstick and air of entitlement practically radiating across the table. "Linda," Rick said, his voice too loud, too smooth. "Good to see you again. Back in the game, huh?" I smiled. Wasn't out for long. The meeting was civil, on the surface, but every minute was a tug of war. Tiffany kept questioning our estimates. Rick kept pushing for lead roles in site coordination, even though we'd already been assigned those duties. It was clear they were trying to rattle us, but I didn't bite. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. We weren't playing their game anymore. They were playing ours. By the end of the month, our team had already cleared 2 major milestones ahead of schedule and under budget. City reps visited the site and praised the clarity of our planning and the professionalism of our crew. Rick, meanwhile, was struggling to get his teams to meet even basic safety compliance. A week later, we received a memo from the city. Phase A had passed inspection early, and Carter Engineering was now eligible for an advanced bidding tier on upcoming projects. That night, Ethan poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one. "To Mom," he said, raising his glass. "The woman who built the foundation, literally and figuratively." I clinked his glass and gave him a smile I hadn't worn in years. We weren't just back. We were winning. We had momentum now. The Green Ridge project wasn't just a win, it was a declaration. Word spread fast in Austin's construction circles. Carter Engineering was no longer the scrappy newcomer or Ethan Carter's passion project. We were legitimate, reliable, fast. But more than that, we were dangerous, and Rick Mason knew it. Instead of stepping up, though, Rick doubled down. He started making noise at City Hall, calling in favors, trying to undermine our credibility. He accused us of cutting corners, using substandard materials, even hinted at licensing violations. Every claim fell apart under scrutiny. We had everything documented to the last invoice, and I made sure every inspection was pristine. The more he pushed, the more he looked desperate. But I knew Rick. I had worked beside him for 3 decades. A man like him wouldn't just fade away. He'd rather burn the whole thing down than admit he lost. And that was the danger. "Let him bark," Ethan said one night as we sat reviewing our next proposal. "He's not the same guy he used to be. He's running on fumes." I stirred my coffee, staring at the screen. That's exactly what scares me. Because a desperate man backed into a corner? That's when he's most unpredictable. It was then that I had an idea, one that even surprised me. I called Rick. He picked up on the second ring. "Linda," he said slowly, wary. "Calling to gloat?" "Not quite," I replied. "I have a proposal." There was silence. "You're serious?" "I am," I said. "I want to help you." Now, let me be clear, this wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't compassion. It was strategy. See, when a rival is weak, you have 2 choices. You can crush them, destroy their reputation, take their clients, leave them bleeding on the sidewalk. Or you can keep them alive just enough to be useful. Let them soak up attention while you quietly take the real power. Ethan didn't like the plan at first. "You want to help the guy who humiliated you? Who hit you?" he said, eyes flaring. "Why?" "Because it's smarter," I answered calmly. "If Rick falls, someone younger, hungrier, and nastier will rise in his place. Someone we don't know. Someone who doesn't know how this town works." Ethan fell silent. He understood. We proposed a partnership, just for Phase B of Green Ridge. Officially, we were supporting Rick's firm as they completed the final stages of the project. In reality, we were taking over execution while his company stayed on paper as the contractor. And to everyone watching, it looked like cooperation. The city loved it. 2 rival firms coming together? That was gold for PR, and it meant no delays, no budget disasters, just clean delivery. Behind the scenes, I had Rick sign a supplemental agreement. Every change order, every permit, every procurement route had to pass through our office first. I wasn't going to let him fumble the ball with our name on the scoreboard. The deeper we got, the clearer it became. Rick's team was a shell. His new hires didn't know how to run a timeline, much less manage vendors. Tiffany had vanished. Word was she'd taken a leave of absence, though we both knew that meant the relationship imploded. And Rick? He was flailing. One Friday afternoon, he called me. "Linda, I need a site manager. Mine just quit." I smiled into the phone. "Don't worry, Rick. I've got it covered." I sent Thomas Alvarez, one of our senior guys, the next morning. And just like that, we were controlling both phases of the project from top to bottom. By the end of the quarter, Carter Engineering received a commendation from the city for seamless coordination and outstanding project performance. Rick's name wasn't even mentioned in the final press release, and still I didn't stop there. While Rick tried to stabilize his crumbling firm, I had already filed a formal arbitration claim against him for unpaid bonuses and withheld wages from my final 2 years at Mason & Company. I had the documents, the pay stubs, the employment contract, all neatly organized, bound in a black leather case. When the board of shareholders at Mason & Company received a copy of the claim, along with a full breakdown of misallocated funds and nepotistic hires, they panicked. Rick had no choice. He paid out every cent. But I wanted more than compensation. I wanted accountability. So I filed a second claim, a medical injury report, for the incident in his office. I didn't care if I got $50 or $5,000. I just wanted the record to show. He crossed a line. Rumor has it, Rick broke his phone against the table when the court papers arrived. Good, because this wasn't just a personal victory. This was the moment I reclaimed every piece of myself he tried to take. Rick's company was falling apart, on paper, in practice, and behind closed doors. While we were being celebrated in city briefings and featured in construction journals, Mason & Company was bleeding. Engineers were leaving. Project delays piled up. Rumors about misused funds and family drama started surfacing online. But none of that truly satisfied me. Not yet. Because every time I thought of the folder he threw at my face, of the way he dismissed 30 years of loyalty like an expired contract, there was still one piece missing. One loose end: Monica Mason, Rick's wife, his legal partner, his former co-founder, and perhaps the only person who still had enough standing to take Rick out completely. I hadn't spoken to Monica in over a decade. Back then, we were the iron triangle of Mason and Company. Rick, Monica, and me. We built the foundation, won the first city contracts, survived lean winters and late invoices together. Until one day, Monica just stepped back. She left the company without warning, married Rick officially, and slowly faded from the public eye. People whispered she was forced out. Others said she chose security over ambition. I never knew the truth, until now. I reached out through a mutual contact and asked to meet her. Just a quiet conversation, no pressure. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in downtown Austin. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a fitted black dress, silver gray hair swept into a tight bob, and heels that clicked with confidence. When she walked in, every table paused for a second. That's the kind of woman Monica Mason still was. Controlled, composed, commanding. "Linda," she said, sitting down across from me. "It's been a while." "Yes," I nodded. "Not since you left the company." She didn't blink. "So why now?" I didn't waste time. I slid my phone across the table and tapped the screen. Photos, screenshots, credit card charges, restaurant bills, hotel bookings, all tied to Rick, all involving Tiffany Rhodes. I watched her face carefully, expecting anger, or betrayal, or shock. But Monica just sipped her coffee. Calm, eyes scanning, steady. When the last image flicked by, she looked up and said flatly, "So you brought me proof of something I've known for years." I hesitated. "You knew?" "I married Rick with my eyes open," she replied. "This isn't about love, this is about stability. He pays the mortgage. He funds the trust. I let him play." I sat back, stunned, not by the coldness in her tone, but by how practical it was. "You're not mad?" I asked. She raised an eyebrow. "I was, 10 years ago. Now, I'm invested, and foolish women get used as weapons." The words hit harder than I expected. Before I could respond, she reached into her handbag, pulled out a silk handkerchief, and poured half her iced water onto the table, directly toward me. It splashed across the wood and soaked my sleeve. I didn't flinch. "Looks like you came to the wrong woman, Linda," she said, rising. "If you want revenge, do it yourself." And she walked out without a second glance. I sat there in silence, hand damp, but mind racing. Because for all her sharpness, Monica had revealed something important. She wasn't going to destroy Rick for me, but she also wasn't going to protect him anymore. She had drawn a line. That night I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my mind. Foolish women get used as weapons. I wasn't trying to be a weapon. I was trying to finish a war. And so I pivoted. Instead of pushing Monica, I pushed myself. I poured everything into the final phase of Green Ridge. I personally reviewed every contract, reran the estimates, inspected the site with Ethan and our senior crew. If we were going to take down Mason and Company, it wouldn't be with leaked photos or public drama. It would be with precision, excellence, and proof. And we delivered. Phase B, Rick's phase, was in chaos. He couldn't hold on to staff, and he couldn't meet deadlines. Eventually, he outsourced the remaining portions overseas, leading to mismatched materials and another round of fines from the city. Meanwhile, our side of the project passed every inspection flawlessly. And then, Monica made her move. 1 week after a disastrous city audit on Rick's part of the project, she walked into Mason and Company's boardroom with a binder full of receipts. Everything Rick had spent on Tiffany, every fake invoice, every misused corporate card. She dropped it on the table and said, "I want half the company or I go public." Rick caved within 24 hours. Monica Mason now owned 50% of Mason and Company. She fired Tiffany, she replaced 3 family managers, and she quietly reached out to me with a proposal. But I wasn't ready to say yes, because I hadn't finished helping my son write his own story yet. The Green Ridge project wrapped on a quiet Thursday afternoon, under a soft Texas sky streaked with gold. The final inspection passed without a single correction. The city rep shook Ethan's hand and said, "If every contractor delivered like you, we'd be ahead of schedule citywide." I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching Ethan beam, not like a kid, but like a man who had come into his own. That night, he didn't go out to celebrate. He walked into my office, still wearing his steel-toe boots, still dust on his shirt. He sank into the chair across from me, ran a hand through his hair and said, "Mom, I think we're ready for the next phase." I nodded slowly. "You're not just managing anymore. You're leading." He looked at me for a long time. "So, what about you?" It was a question I'd been dodging for weeks. I could have stayed on. There was still so much I could do. But the truth was, I didn't need to. The fire that had once kept me grinding late into the night had turned into something calmer, something complete. "I'm stepping back," I said. Ethan blinked. "For real this time?" "For real," I smiled. "You don't need my training wheels anymore." He didn't argue. He just leaned forward and said, with a voice lower than I'd ever heard from him, "Thank you for getting me here." And that's when it hit me. This battle was never about beating Rick. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about building something that would outlast me. And now it had a name, a logo, a crew, a culture. It had Ethan. I took a few days to clear out my desk. I left behind notes, systems, a few encouraging sticky tabs. The younger staff gave me a small send-off, a cake, a card, a bouquet of bright wildflowers. They didn't know the wars I'd fought to get here, but that was okay. It meant I'd done my job well. A week into my retirement, Ethan invited me to the firm's celebration party, a proper event this time, with clients, partners, and even city officials in attendance. I showed up in a soft blue dress and low heels, a far cry from the hard hats and steel-toe boots of my former life. I stood near the back, drink in hand, watching Ethan take the stage. His voice was clear. His timing was smooth. He cracked a few jokes, acknowledged his team, and when he mentioned me, it was only with a brief pause and a look that said everything: gratitude, pride, and a kind of silent promise to carry the torch forward. Afterward, he walked over to me with 2 glasses of champagne and asked, "So, do you feel at peace now?" I didn't even hesitate. "I do." He clinked his glass to mine. "And now what?" I smiled. "Buy some flowers, maybe adopt a cat, take long walks, do the things I love." He laughed, shook his head. "You earned that." And I had. Because in the end, my greatest fight wasn't against Rick Mason or Monica or Tiffany or the broken system that tried to squeeze me out. It was against the version of myself that forgot how powerful she really was. I remembered her now. I carried her with me as I stepped out of the company I helped transform, not broken, not bitter, but whole. Let Rick stay out there, clinging to old favors. Let Monica restructure what she could. Let the industry whisper whatever it liked. Carter Engineering was now the standard. Ethan was the future. And I was free. On my first real morning off, I brewed a cup of coffee, stepped onto my porch, and watched the sunrise stretch across the hills of Austin. The air smelled of wet soil and blooming jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked and birds scattered from the trees. For the first time in decades, I didn't have a deadline, and it felt like the first breath of a new life. Not a comeback, not revenge, just peace. There are people who give their whole lives in service, quietly, without applause, without demands. They show up early, stay late, solve problems, and carry the weight others drop. And yet when the tides change, they're the ones pushed aside, seen as outdated, too old, or no longer useful. Linda Carter was one of those people. She gave 30 years of her life to a company she helped build, but when nepotism took over and loyalty was replaced by favoritism, she was cast out. Injured, disrespected, forgotten. But instead of breaking, she rose. She joined her son's firm, helped rebuild a real team, and showed the industry who truly held the skills, the discipline, and the integrity. She didn't get revenge by shouting or slandering. She won by doing what she'd always done, delivering results, staying sharp, and leading with strength. Her story reminds us, your worth is not defined by who recognizes it. It's defined by what you know, how you carry yourself, and what you choose to stand for, even when no one is clapping. If one door closes unfairly, you don't have to fight your way back in. Sometimes, your greatest power lies in building a new door and inviting the right people through it. And perhaps the most powerful lesson, forgiveness isn't weakness. Choosing not to destroy someone who wronged you because you're focused on building something better is strength in its purest form. Whether you're rebuilding after loss, guiding a new generation, or simply trying to remember who you are beneath the dust of disappointment, remember this: your value doesn't disappear just because others stop seeing it. It lives in your actions, your courage, your resilience, and the legacy you leave behind when you choose growth over bitterness.